It's time now for On Your Mind on WRFG Atlanta, heard each Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. This show focuses on mental health, consciousness, thought, feeling, and behavior as it applies to human understanding and growth. The views and opinions expressed on this program may not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the WRFG board, staff, or its volunteers.
Hello, this is Weston Robins, president and founder of Eternal Strength Experiential Center for Radical Youth Work. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor of interviewing none other than my mom, Jinger Robins, who has been in the field of mental health and psychology. Jinger Robins has worked in the fields of child development, child advocacy, and child abuse for over 40 years. Mrs. Robins has a master's degree in psychology with a specialty in applied behavioral analysis from Drake University and is published in the Journal of Organizational Behavior Management. With over 37 years of experience in the development, management, and oversight of nonprofit organizations, including startups, mergers, and restructures, Mrs. Robins was selected as the founding executive director of SafePath Children's Advocacy Center and has served in that capacity since 1995. Mom, it is incredible and an awesome opportunity to have you on WRFG's On Your Mind, and I'm grateful to have you here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Wes. It's kind of surreal, to say the least, and I'll just flip your words and say it is a honor and a pleasure to be here and to be looking at you interviewing me. It's an honor.
So I tell a lot of families, I have this kind of tagline where I'm like, my mom's got her master's in behavioral analysis and my grandmother's got her EDD in psychology. And I come from a long lineage of strong women that have made their presence in the field of psychology and social work. And it was in my blood, whether I wanted it or not. From 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, looking at human behavior, the world, society, culture, and examining that through the lens of these really strong women that I now recognize are just pillars that have kind of paved the way. But I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about your journey and maybe starting early on with how you even got into the mental health counseling field, some of your study in academia, and then would love for you to elaborate on your work as the executive director of SafePath Children's Advocacy Center and what that journey's been like and the current work that you're doing now.
I just recently found out that my mother's mother, your Nana, actually was one of the first social workers in the state of New Hampshire. So it even goes back a little bit further than my mom in terms of the lineage and the strong women in the field, helpers, caregivers, mental health professionals that wanted to do something.
And isn't that her name, Blanche?
Yes, Blanche McGee.
And I have in my office at Eternal Strength, I have the photo, and it is Dominique Antonio Trujano, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandmother, Mary Wadley Elizabeth, and her daughter Blanche is Nana's mom, who had the background in social work. Wow. Okay. Sorry.
Very good. Yeah. So it really goes back quite a ways. And, you know, my perspective of life really started for me when I was 12. And that's to kind of go back to brought me to where I am today was, you know, my mom, your Nana or grandmother, you know, was in the field of psychology, had her EDD, worked in that field for years. As a young girl, I would go with her in Savannah to her office where she would see different clients. And I was young and very intrigued by that. And then watched my mom going through that at the same time watching my father, your grandfather, who's passed on now, Peepaw, as a drill sergeant in the Marine Corps. And so you have this combination of a drill sergeant and a therapeutic caring mother with dynamic visions of the world very strong father saying, no, this is the right and wrong of it, raising 3 children, me being the middle child. And then when they divorced, I actually very much identified with that loss of family and said, oh, this will never happen to me. I will grow up and I will learn to study and not just get my EED, I will get my PhD and I will save all the children in the world. Mm-hmm. That was the 12-year-old in me. And it carried me a very long way. I got married very young and had started going to college. I wasn't so sure I wanted to be married, but I knew I wanted children. Back in my day, those two went together. So got married and then basically said to your father, who is a Citadel graduate. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Said to him, regardless of what you think, I'm going to get my PhD in psychology. And we began the journey. Went to university in South Carolina, and then he would get transferred to a different to a different state, and I would go to a different school. Carried that all the way along to where we landed in Des Moines, Iowa, and trying to look at the different psychology departments and fields that I wanted to study. A lot of them didn't make sense to me as a young professional. You know, there was Maslow, there were all these different areas that you could study. The one that really spoke to me was what was going on at Drake University at the time when I went for my master's degree, and they offered an accelerated program, and it was applied behavioral analysis and studying about B.F. Skinner and studying about Morse code and learning how the world could be explained behaviorally. That made sense to me. It all just clicked a button for me. I would argue with the best, the smartest professors that would come along and argue with them and say, no, that's not true. It's all based on reinforcers and punishers and, you know, your variable rate of reinforcement, et cetera, et cetera. And I just aligned with it to the point that it gave me a vision and a mission in my heart to be able to do what I wanted to do, which was help children.
That's beautiful. And something about it gave you clarity, and you could see in a certain way your worldview and what was happening and occurring with human behavior now made sense from a behaviorist lens. And how old were you?
At that point, I was in my early 20s, and we had moved to Des Moines, and I got married when I was 19. So I'd say I was probably about 23, 24, 25, and I was just the light. I would fight with the most. I remember Dr. Lloyd from Drake University, and I battled with him on things, and he said, you know, you ask the questions that we need people to hear so that we can explain our techniques. And I said, great. And he said, you want to join the accelerated master's program? I said, absolutely. And so I did my master's in like a year and a half, along with 2 other students that were chosen. And it was just double duty. And everything went on the side, and then stepped out of school into running a center in Des Moines, Iowa, with 600 plus children. It was during the time that the governor of Iowa opened the doors to the Vietnamese to come into that state and find a home. So we had a lot of bilingual things going on. And here I was, a fresh graduate, still trying to frantically finish my thesis so that I could actually get my diploma running a center with 25 employees, 600 children, and your father dressing up as Santa during the holidays.
That's wild. I mean, I can, and it's wild, the parallel process. As I sit here now, although, you know, a little bit older, 39, and completing my PhD from the University of West Georgia and running a center. And although it's, you know, different, it's like all the different similarities, especially with the family dynamic piece that you mentioned, where it's like, your dad from a military background, your mom from social work and higher education, you going into academia, higher education, dad being in Citadel and military. So tell me a little bit about, so you complete your master's in behavioral analysis, ABA specialty, applied behavioral analysis. You guys stay in Des Moines, Iowa, and then what?
I go to work for the Polk County Juvenile Home. I am the staff psychologist at Polk County Juvenile Home. Feeling very proud of myself. I've worked hard to get to be where I want to be to help families. And during that period of time, there was something called family preservation with the state of Iowa, which at all expense, keeping the family together was the goal. And so I would get court ordered to provide therapy to children who were either going to be placed in a facility that was detention, or they were in foster care, or they were living with their families with a very temporary situation and guardians around what was going on with them. So I did that job for a little bit and started to become slowly but surely very, very frustrated. It was kind of like a cog in a wheel. Meet the family, meet the parent, do the assessment, give the determination, go to court, testify in the courtroom, say what should happen, and then have a judge hit the gavel and say the child's going home, when you knew, in fact, that child was going to be in a very dangerous situation. So I started to very early in my career get very frustrated with the system, and the only system that was available at that time. And then lo and behold, I ended up pregnant, unbeknownst to me, and I wasn't expecting that at all. And so, that gave some personal mental health relief to me because I was having a baby so I could deal with the work frustrations. Unfortunately, as you know, Austin passed away 3 days after he was born from hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And after dealing with that trauma, not only personally, but as a family, mm-hmm. and as a married couple, fast forward to 2 years later, I have a young boy that's the largest baby in the nursery called Weston Robins. Healthy, you don't have to worry about him, but you were definitely glued to my side at that point. So,
and that was 1982. So now we fast forward to 82, and you and Dad are still in Iowa?
I'm still in Iowa.
Yeah.
And of course, at that point, I decided the juvenile home was not a fit for me. They begged me to stay, but I was not in my service as a staff psychologist doing any good to the families and or the children. It was just a system that drove itself based on policies that you had to follow.
Right.
And so I got very involved in things like PTA, PTO, fight the system at the school level. You were glued to my hip at all the public hearings I went to. You would stand beside me and laugh and giggle or sit in the front row. And I would talk about how the world needed to change. And then we kind of fast forward to where we got transferred to Virginia. And lo and behold, Hannah came along 6 years later.
Fredericksburg, Virginia, and that Hannah was born, so 6 years later. So now it's 88. You're living in Fredericksburg, 2 little kids.
Right.
And Dad was working
24/7 like he always does, golfing, working, teaching you to swim. I had a baby girl. I was in heaven in terms of being a parent because I had 2 children who were healthy and alive and rocking on. And then we got transferred to North Carolina, and I had enough settling with my, that North Carolina was before Virginia. I back up. I ran a center in North Carolina. Then we went to Virginia. And then from Virginia, we got transferred to Atlanta. And when we came to Atlanta, I, said to your dad, I said, okay, this is all great raising babies and all this, but if we're not going to have any more, then I'm going to go back to that saving the world and all the children that are out there that need me. And so I applied for the position in 1995 at SafePath Children's Advocacy Center. And I quickly found out that my love is systemic change. It is not seeing parents individually for therapy. It is not seeing children individually for therapy, but it's changing the system so that things within the system can change and be healthier for what the parents and the children need.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. And I think about, of course, it's difficult for me to think about the influence and the impact that it had on me on an unconscious level, being younger and watching you, because I really didn't know it at the time. But now I look at my heart and how it moves through the world and systemic change and desiring that so much. And it feels like a burden and a curse at times, and then at other times it's my life's mission and everything, but really just truly starting to see from a meta level all the things that need to change from a societal and a cultural standpoint to prevent some of the repeated challenges that we're seeing in family systems. And it's that parable that I quote all the time, where it's, the villager walking down the stream and sees a little baby and jumps in and grabs it and pulls it to the side, and then walks a little bit further and sees two, jumps in, grabs them, pulls them to dry land, walks a little further, and the babies are just multiplying, continues to jump in and pull them out. And then at some point comes to the place where they go, I got two options. I can keep walking down this stream and pulling these babies out and rescuing and bringing them to dry land, or I can walk upstream and see why so many are even getting into the stream into the first place. And I think you did that with your career, with your efforts, with your work. And I look at SafePath since you came on in 1995, and now it's become a center of excellence, hearing children's voices, one of the largest fundraisers every single year, and how SafePath has grown. I could talk to you all day, but I would love for you to dive into a little bit of the growth of SafePath, and then currently what SafePath is doing as an advocacy center. And the broad overview that I tell people is children's advocacy centers are a multidisciplinary setup for any child that there's been an abuse or an allegation of abuse, whether that be physical or sexual. And from birth to 17, they can come to this advocacy center where they can receive all of the services they need in a one-stop shop and cannot be re-traumatized by the system. And so there's forensic evaluations, there's therapy and counseling and care, and then you guys work closely with Crimes Against Children and Department of Family and Children's Services. So that's kind of the broad brushstroke overview of an advocacy center. But I would love for you to talk about SafePath in particular and your journey as executive director and what you've done in the field and what's currently going on.
Right. And yeah, the advocacy centers are nationwide. They have standards, and statewide, the Children's Advocacy Centers of Georgia, and then every county or judicial circuit will have an advocacy center if we're lucky. And Cobb has one, and that's the one that I started up and ran with a group of people who really had the idea, but didn't understand the dynamics of all of the credentials and licensing and everything that you needed to do. So I was started to work with law enforcement, Department of Family and Children's Services, District Attorney's Office, medical professionals, mental health professionals. When you put all those people at a table, each one of those disciplines has a different mission. Law enforcement want to know, did a crime occur? If a crime didn't occur, they're not involved. Defects wants to know, is the child safe at home? If they're safe at home, they don't need to be at the table. Medical wants to look at the physical well-being. Is the child all right? The therapist want to know, is the physical well-being okay? So when you bring all that wide, broad range of people together, professionals, they all think they're right. And they all know exactly what needs to be done. But you've got a little child in the middle of the table that you've really got to focus on. And whether they're 3, makes you go one way. If they're 16 or 17, it's a different way. But how can we come together as a system, have some good memorandum of understandings, respect for each other's disciplines to work through the process of intervention, investigation, prosecution, and treatment of allegations of any type of child abuse. That's what I was thrown into. And it was very exciting to me because from a behavioral standpoint, I could very easily work with someone for a while and determine what's their reinforcer. And it wasn't on that strict of a thing, but I also would learn, how does this person communicate? When do they hear me? What is it I need to do to talk? And so we were able to build those across all the disciplines, bring everybody together, start to write the protocols. We have a Cobb County Child Abuse Protocol. We have a Child Fatality Review Committee. Any death of any child in our county must be reviewed if a doctor doesn't sign off on it. A lot of people have opinions on that, but we've got to come up with an agreement. Could it have been prevented? What do we need to do moving forward? So it was really this multidisciplinary team and being able to approach it from a perspective of we all don't communicate and function the same way. If you can step back, and I will state, I am a radical behaviorist, which basically means there are emotions, there are feelings, and there is all of that. It's just there aren't any good data points to measure it.
Yeah.
The only way to measure all of that is to look at the way a person behaves.
Right.
I can assume if you look down, you're depressed or you're shy or you're whatever, you know. So I'm a radical. I believe in all of it. I just can't data point it and chart it and show you how to change it. It takes a lot more. So I worked with the team. We developed SafePath. And where I got pushback in the beginning, now law enforcement, all 6 cities in Cobb, all unincorporated Cobb, the DA, Department of Family and Children's Services, the state do not want SafePath to go away. They want us there at the table. They rely on us to walk them through this system. And so it's been as long as, and that's what I say professionally, from a professional standpoint, as long as I'm developing and growing a system that the output is good, it's not just I've learned how to do the system that was told how to be done, but we are developing and moving and growing, then I am in my prime loving what I'm doing.
Awesome, man. I'm like blown away, Mom. I'm sitting here and 2 things showed up for me. One is, as you're talking about behaviorism and you're talking about the quantitative measurement of behaviors and how that can be done with these data points, Ken Wilber, who I really like, and he's like a metaphysicist, and he's written a lot on ecology, sex, spirituality was his big book. But he did this quadrant, and it really opened up my understanding. He said, look, the internals of an individual, what they think, what they feel emotionally, all these things, the only way that you can ever get to those is by relationship with another human and sitting, but it's still all self-report.
Yeah.
So he makes the joke. He says, look, I can measure your brain all day long. I can quantitatively measure the neurotransmitters and what's occurring and do this metric on it, but I'm never going to know a single thought or emotion you had. But to your point, and you naming yourself as a radical behaviorist, it's like you believe in the existence of all of those other fields like consciousness and exploration and thoughts and emotions. It's just there's not a quantitative metric, and so it becomes difficult and challenging. So let's start with the thing we can measure,
right?
Pay attention to it and use that to gain more information. And what blows me away, Mom, and I mean, I always knew you were a badass and just incredible, but here I think about your journey, and I think about you being a young girl, and I'll get emotional as I talk about it, but like having these moments in your life, these pillars, these milestones where you go, I came from this background. I want to study this. I want to see what I'm capable of, and getting to the masters at Drake and really getting bitten by this bug of like, man, it's making me think different in my worldview. And now I want to make systemic change.
Mhm.
But you went into a system of law enforcement, district attorneys, politics, like the entire governmental system without any real background in any of those disciplines. It's not like you came in with a judicious doctorate or juris doctorate, or we're doing anything as an attorney or whatever. Here was a young woman with a mission and a passion and a vision and a dream to help families and young people. You were like, I'll sit at the table with anybody. It's so awesome because there are so many people that I know that would be like, I can't do that. I'm sorry, I don't understand your discipline. I don't have formalized training in that. And here I've watched you let the mission of helping the kids and your heart guide you to come back to, all I got to do is understand human beings. All I got to do is, it's not like these systems exist outside of humans. So you understand the humans that run the system, you understand their incentives and what's driving them behaviorally, and you do whatever you need to do to get in whatever arena you need to make the systemic change that needs to happen for the health of that young kid and that family.
Right.
That's
Yep.
beautiful.
Yep. And I definitely, and I think part of that was my dad. Because he would always say there are no dumb questions. And if anybody ever says you've asked a dumb one, you let me know who they are. I'll take care of them. Remember, he was a Marine.
Yeah.
So that piece, whatever that was that he gave me, even though we had conflicting times growing up, really always stuck with me. And it's a very strong, thing. I don't mind sharing my opinion, even when to me it sounds kind of goofy.
Yeah.
I'm like, did I just say that? But then there'll be somebody else at that table who goes, wow, I've thought that before, but I just didn't have the guts to say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, but it's been that learning to communicate with people. And now and it is politics. I got kicked off the floor of the legislative house in North Carolina and in Iowa.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were certain things you weren't supposed to do. So when they were arguing, I was young. I was pregnant. You were probably there with me inside. I stood up and yelled something, and they said, "Are you from the press?" And I said, "No, that's not right," and off I went. So it's the passion. And I truly believe, and this is just me again, but I look at the age of about 12. I don't know what it is. 11, 12, 10, 11, 12. And I ask grown-ups today, what was your favorite movie? What were you doing at 11 or 12? For most kids, when they really start getting into maybe bad choices, really bad, and et cetera, 9 to 12, it's just that kind of that awkward stage. And they can tell me, even as adults, what their favorite movies were. What they were hanging in with, man, and what really made an impression on them. And I always go back to that, combined with the trauma I was probably having around my parents being divorced. And I just said, no other kid's going to suffer that. Yep, I got them all. Your father was afraid I was going to adopt every poor child in the world when we got married. It is.
It's beautiful. And Mom, I'm so grateful. I could talk to you forever. I mean that. And I want to have you back on here. And then at some point, maybe we can drag Nana on here. I know she's not super stoked about it, but I'd like to I am grateful for your time, for your energy, for your expertise. And you are, to this day, my biggest role model. And your mission lives through me, and it's children and it's families, and it's just helping and reducing suffering. So I thank you.
Thank you for listening to On Your Mind on WRFG Atlanta. This program is heard every Tuesday from 6:30 to 7 p.m. program focuses on mental health, psychotherapy, your thoughts, feelings, and behavior, as well as understanding human nature and consciousness. Our rotating co-hosts include psychologists and educators with expertise in aspects of the human mind. The opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WRFG's staff, management, or volunteers. Please listen again next week on Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. to On Your Mind.